sometimes see kids, young kids, already slaving away with crazy weightlifting exercises. And when you mentioned that, I was actually like, oh yeah, he's right. And then I remembered all the things that I saw over the years. And I was actually wondering, is that really healthy? So, and, that's one question. And the other is, what's your philosophy on kids training with weights? What's a good age, for example? Should they be training with weights at all?
Yes, yeah. So that's it's different for boys and girls. So there's a process, a really good sort of mapping process for this. The research has kind of shown where these windows of opportunity appear for both boys and girls, and because girls develop at a quicker rate than the guys do, they can actually do strength training a bit earlier. But the key is that it's around something called peak height velocity. So there's this stage in the process where the kids are growing at the quickest rate they're going to grow, and before that point, or even at that point, it's not a good time to do any heavy resistance work. So up until that point, you're more working kind of like literacy of movement, developing sort of skilled movement patterns, jumping and leaping and changing direction, balance, all these kind of things, flexibility, mobility, any sort of throwing and catching skills, hand-eye coordination, all these kind of things, and trying to make it as fun as possible. And you can work the patterns that you'd use in resistance training. So knee dominant squatting patterns, hip dominant kind of like deadlifting, that sort of pattern, but you don't load it specifically. Upper body pushes and pulls, core stability, all these kind of things. They're kind of like foundation literacy that you need. Once they kind of get beyond this kind of peak height velocity, once they've gone through this growth spurt, which is, earlier for the girls, they're kind of typically looking at kind of 15, 16 for girls. They can actually start getting loaded, whereas the guys aren't ready yet. They're still going through that testosterone release and their body's kind of normalizing. And it's not till kind of typically 16, 17 years old that you can start loading the guys up. But up until that point, they can still work with resistance, but it wouldn't be what we deem heavy enough to be true strength training or power training. It's more training to train, learning the skills of movement and balance and stability and mobility, and getting all of those things in place. Once they've kind of gone past that peak height velocity, then you're safe to start loading it. And that's what we do with athletes, and it's what I do with children in the gym as well. So you can kind of tell with how quickly they're growing. There's some calculations you can do, actually. This is my nerdy side coming out. I'll have to try and find a link I can share with you, actually. But there's some calculations you can put into a form online where you measure the standing height of your child and the seated height of your child, sat down on their backside and where their head comes then. And you enter that information along with their age and their weight into a formula that's online. And it will tell you whether your child is at peak height velocity, how many years they're away from it they are, or whether they've gone past it. And even you can backdrive it into a bit of a calculation as to what their adult height's going to be and all this kind of stuff, which for me with sports performance is great, because I can sort of see if a child, for example, my daughter, if she's going to be too tall to be a professional dancer, and as it turns out, she's going to be the absolute ideal height. So, we're encouraging her as much as possible. Her goal is to be a professional dancer, and everything in the way she's developing means that is going to be a realistic option for her. If she was going to be way too tall and she would never have a partner that would be able to lift her and look graceful, it would be like, well, you're going to be able to enjoy dance, but actually as a career, that's not going to be something that's going to be practical for you. So that's something that I'm bearing in mind when I'm training children. But it's mainly about building up that confidence that they can do all this kind of stuff and mimic those patterns in the first place. And then you start loading up when they're at a realistic stage to be able to do that.
Excellent. Thanks. And then